one of the ways you can trap criminals in the United States is the total unoriginality. I mean, for the last 40 or 50 years, it's always been the Lee Harvey Oswald. If anybody gets assassinated, lone crazed killer, communist, lone crazed killer. These murders have almost always been plots, but, oh no, you're not a conspiracy theory. Oh, no, you must believe in flying saucers. Well, everything in the United States is a conspiracy. Haven't we figured that out yet? Whether it's the tobacco companies saying smoke Lucky Strikes because then you'll be healthy. I mean, everyone conspires to cheat the people and conspires to seize power. What is a political party but a conspiracy to seize the power of the state? Any child can work that one out.
We're talking to Gore Vidal today on Media Matters. I'm your host, Bob McChesney, here in WILL AM 580.
Security was for the senator?
From the Los Angeles Police Department, we were not providing security. This is not...
One witness said that those shots came so close together that he could scarcely believe they were fired from one gun. A reporter heard the shots from the adjoining room, said they sounded almost like they came from a machine gun. So short was the burst of fire.
The political murder is a part of our lives. It has been through our history, even though our history shows that political assassination usually has changed things not for the better, but for the worse. Senator Kennedy is the latest victim.
Run back. I just saw somebody run back, and then I heard somebody say he's been shot, and that's all I heard. That's all I saw this man run back there.
There has been a chase after that man?
Everybody started...
Are you afraid right now, Senator? Are you afraid?
I don't like this.
I know you don't.
I'm afraid. I don't like it.
No, you're afraid.
They were berating her, badgering her, thinking of little tricks to throw her off.
Well, he put words in her mouth. He literally put the words in her mouth. And she finally broke down under the intense pressure.
As we begin to hear from these edited excerpts, Hernandez is giving a solo rendition of Good Cop, Bad Cop, showing a patronizing concern for Serrano on the one hand and menacing her in subtle ways on the other. Serrano, one must remember, was merely a witness. She was not a person accused of a serious crime, clinging to a flimsy story with the hope of escaping punishment. She had no reason to invent such a story, but more important, the LAPD's own All Points Bulletin, from a separate source, describes the very people and the conversation Serrano was reporting. Nevertheless, Hernandez keeps attacking. The promise is that if she changes her story, the questioning will end. The threat is to publicly denounce her as a liar and to continue the interrogations.
Now you see what happens. There's two ways to approach this thing.
What?
The first one is for me to appeal to you as a decent woman that campaigned for Senator Clinton. This is the one way I can approach. The other way is for me to fold up the paper, go up here and tell these people, have them come whatever they're going to tell upstairs. And this is the wrong way, because look, I have to look at myself. When I shave in the morning, I look at myself.
Right.
And right now I have my deepest compassion for you because you're a young lady. Mm-hmm. And I want to try to do whatever I believe is best for you. What's best for you?
Well, there was this girl coming. She was coming downstairs and she said, we shot. No, this girl in a polka dot dress, a white dress, polka dot.
Don't. It's like a disease. I know what I'm telling you. I know what I'm telling you.
It says I've never even seen a girl with a polka dot dress.
I'm saying that nobody told you we have shot Kennedy.
If somebody told me that we have shot
No.
I'm sorry, but that's true. That is true.
Look, one of these days you're going to be 27 years old, 28 years old. What kind of a person?
It's a whole mess of things.
Well, start from the beginning.
It's too messed up. Even I can't even remember what happened anymore.
Well, number one, nobody told you we had shot Kennedy.
No, somebody told me we had shot Kennedy.
No, nobody told you. Where did they tell you this, Sandy?
Outside.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Yes, sir. This is, yes, sir.
Sandy, like I say, don't be.
Well, I'm not going to say I truly believe somebody told me, and I'm not going to say no, nobody told me just to satisfy anybody else.
No, just the truth to satisfy yourself. No, to satisfy the family, the remaining family of this. The Kennedys have had nothing but tragedy here since the first President Kennedy, now Senator Bobby Kennedy. Now what next? They have enough. At least it's a consolation to them. And I'm certain, and you mark my words, that one of these days, if you're woman enough, you will get a letter from Ethel Kennedy, personal, thanking you for at least letting her rest on this aspect of this investigation.
Somebody told me that, honest. No, really.
No, look, Sandy, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I want you to tell me the truth about the staircase. Nobody in that staircase, what you're telling me here, told you that we have shot Kennedy.
A woman told me we had shot Kennedy.
Where did she tell you this?
Outside.
Outside where?
I believe I was on the staircase.
You say I believe I was on the staircase?
Sure.
I mean, look, a half lie is as much as a lie because there are no half lies.
Yeah, I was on the stairway. That's what she said.
Sandy, look, you're basically a decent person.
Thanks.
You're basically a decent person. But here you are, you're 20 years old. This is going to change your whole life in here. You're growing real fast in this room right now because you know that you have to make a decision to tell what's truthful, what's honest, what's right. No, you can't say that.
I can go.
Well, you can't say it with your lips, you can say it, but with your feeling, your heart, your soul, you've told me here. These are lies. This story is a lie. This didn't happen.
As we listen to excerpts from the last 20 minutes, we hear Serrano begin to wear down. Sergeant Hernandez senses her exhaustion and in his patronizing manner begins his endgame.
How come you're making yourself suffer like this?
I'm not making myself suffer. I'm not suffering. Leave me alone.
The only time that you will be left alone, and I can tell you right now, you tell me what happened out there, and I can assure you that nobody else will.
I don't know what happened. To tell you the truth, I don't know what happened. I don't know really what happened. Everything is such a mess.
Well, think about it, Sandra.
I thought about it over and over and over and over in my head, and over and over and over and over, and I don't know. I can remember somebody, in my mind, I can remember somebody who said this to me. I can remember crying and crying and crying, and I can remember saying, oh, they told me we shot him. I can remember saying that, and then before I knew, like, oh, you see two people? Oh, they were coming. Where were you at? I was outside. Did you see them run? Yeah. You know, the whole big mess. Oh, I don't know. They messed me up. And I knew all along they were messing me up. They messed me up so bad. It's not that I was telling you all lies. It's not the truth. I wasn't telling you all lies because somebody didn't tell me.
Well, they told you Kennedy had been shot, or they shot Kennedy, or he shot Kennedy. Then the policeman started questioning you. The next thing it was two people. The next thing it was a woman in a white and black polka dot dress. And before you know it, there they are. Sure, I can see where you got messed up.
Yeah, but look what's happened. You think what happened? This whole thing has got out of proportion.
Well, we're going to stop it right now, aren't we? Aren't we, Sandy? We're going to stop it right now, and I'm going to go see if we can get a stenographer to come up and take a statement and stop it right now.
Hernandez finally gets his way. After over an hour of agonizing confrontation, he leads Serrano through a series of questions where she ultimately agrees to having been, quote, messed up. At the time Kennedy was murdered, Robert Houghton was chief of detectives for the Los Angeles police. It was under his direction that Special Unit Senator would be formed to investigate the crime. Special Unit Senator was also the title of Houghton's 1971 book, written to explain to the American people what really happened in the Robert Kennedy killing. Under the safe cover of official secrecy, Chief of Detectives Houghton would be able to quote with satisfaction from Sandra Serrano's recantation, never having to mention all that preceded it. Special Unit Senator closed the vexing case of the polka-dot dress girl, says Houghton proudly in his book. In police work, for lack of a better word, we say a witness was contaminated.
This was obviously an open and shut case right from the beginning with all of the witnesses and the physical evidence. And I don't think it probably could have been handled in any better fashion than it really was.
Reporter Ted Chirac first recorded the complaints of the owners of the gun shop where Sirhan bought his ammunition, Ben and Donna Herrick.
I gave a statement to the FBI and the Los Angeles Police Department that Sirhan and 2 others had been in here about 6 weeks before. That they asked for some 357 armor-piercing tank ammo. We didn't have it for sale.
That's right. And they didn't even want her to testify because she wouldn't change her story.
Their former clerk, Larry Arnott, who actually made the sale, was impeached when he testified that Sirhan was with 2 other men.
Like the Arnott testimony, asking him if he sold the ammunition, and he said yes, and then they said he failed a lie detector test, and they have him identify the sales slip. And the sales slip definitely proves the fact that he was telling the truth, and they say the lie detector says he said he was telling a lie and then throw him off the witness stand, you know, like it just discredited the man's testimony and made a fool out of him. And for no reason, because he was a prosecution witness to begin with. And it was the prosecution that did it to him, you know, and I don't like the smell of it.
I said that when we first started this investigation, you were a little girl at the time, but I said that we've interviewed 4,000 people, and we've done it because someday somebody, for purposes best known to themselves, regardless of the evidence, is going to try to prove that Sirhan didn't do it, that this was a conspiracy, that this is some big mysterious plan that, in spite of all the investigation, we haven't been able to uncover. We knew it would happen.
I was very unhappy with my encounter with the police department when I went down to the administration building. I was very much struck by their desire to fabricate a story and by their effort to strong-arm me mentally into stating that there were things that I did not agree with.
Some people who are interested in undermining confidence in the government of the United States, subversive people, will say this is some kind of a plot and so forth. And we anticipated all of this in advance.
If there's anything more to this, some of these witnesses may not live to testify again. I don't know how many people want to say this, but I am afraid.
But when there are witnesses that said Sirhan never got behind Senator Kennedy, and then there are medical reports saying he was shot from behind, isn't that a significant discrepancy?
Well, as I say, you apparently want all the witnesses, or would prefer to have all the witnesses sound like they'd memorized their testimony. I wouldn't. There was no significant discrepancy. Now, you and I are just arguing. Now, you apparently think there was a significant discrepancy. And if we stay here for 4 hours, I do not think I will conclude there was a significant discrepancy in the testimony.
They wrote me a very, very long and terrible letter that my son's going to be killed in the street one day, and they threatened, a real threatened letter, you know, which I give over to the FBI.
A scathing report on the LAPD from the human rights group Amnesty International. Here's ABC's Judy Muller.
The report is doubly damning. In a year-long study of both the LA Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, Amnesty International said officers and deputies regularly use excessive force out of all proportion to the threat posed by the victims, often in violation of international standards.
At times, it has amounted to torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, where people have been beaten, tasered, shot, or attacked by police dogs. It is, frankly, an appalling record.
Does anybody pay attention to Amnesty International anymore? You know, these are a bunch of do-gooders and liberals. They came in, we cooperated with them fully, but that doesn't make it. We knew what the report was going to say. The sheriff knew what the report was going to say.
Normally conditioned American who's been trained to kill, then to have no memory of having killed. Without memory of his deed, he cannot possibly feel guilt. Nobody, of course, have any reason to fear being caught. And having been relieved of those uniquely American symptoms, guilt and fear, he cannot possibly give himself away.
I told them to build me an assassin. I wanted a killer from a world filled with killers, and they chose you.
It's a terrible thing to hate your mother. But I didn't always hate her.
The preceding is from Richard Condon's novel, The Manchurian Candidate, which in 1962 became a hit movie, in which Lawrence Harvey played Raymond Shaw, a highly decorated prisoner of war who was brainwashed by his North Korean captors to become a robot assassin programmed to murder the president. Unknown to millions of people who thrilled to this taut tale in theaters across America, the Central Intelligence Agency, at the time, through its MK-Ultra program, was devoting large resources to see if by drugs, electroshock, or hypnotism, a robot assassin could in fact be created. Common wisdom, of course, holds that a person cannot be programmed to do something that he would find morally objectionable. But not everyone believes that.
After receiving a small dose of LSD, they're confused and undisciplined.
The notion that you can't be hypnotized to do something you're not morally inclined to do was clearly disproved by our government.
Dr. Philip Melanson is the author of the recently released book, The Robert Kennedy Assassination, in which he investigates the hypnoprogramming aspects of the Kennedy murder. Dr. Melanson has spent over a decade looking through government mind control files.
The experts that they had doing this kind of research believed you could do that. They demonstrated how it could be done both in their own practices and in their work for the government. And millions of dollars was spent and hundreds of people were worked on and were made to do those things. And the successful uses of hypno-programmed persons as couriers and spies is admitted by the government. The government refuses to admit assassination, but clearly they had that technology available as well. And it can be done. The mainstream of the medical profession and the experts think it can't be done or choose to believe it can't be done. But the broad group working for the government believed it could be done and demonstrated that they could do it.
From the moment Sirhan was caught with a smoking gun to this day, as he serves a life sentence in a California prison, Sirhan claims to have no memory of killing Bobby Kennedy. In what appeared to be an open and shut case, Sirhan's lawyers never contested his guilt. They merely sought to prove him insane, incapable of planning the assassination. But the jury convicted Sirhan of first-degree premeditated murder. They concluded he was a politically motivated assassin, a lone gunman who was faking his amnesia to avoid punishment. But some experts investigating the assassination believe Sirhan's amnesia is genuine. They offer a highly controversial theory for the cause of Sirhan's lack of memory.
Sirhan's lack of memory for the murder of Robert Kennedy was genuine, and it was established by both the defense and the prosecution before the trial. Sirhan himself badly wanted to remember what had happened. After all, he was caught with a smoking gun, so he wanted very badly to remember, and he worked hard at it, but he was still unable to come up with any motive or any memory of the crime.
Sirhan remembers the events just prior to the shooting and just after his capture, but claims to have a lapse in memory during the actual shooting.
Do you remember drinking coffee?
I remember being around the coffee.
You don't remember anything at all after that? What do you remember when you got back and after you've had some coffee?
I was choking like a son of a bitch.
Choking?
I was choking.
Choking on what?
They grind my throat.
Oh, you mean after the shooting?
Yeah.
I see.
Psychiatrists for both the defense and prosecution testified that Sirhan did have amnesia for the assassination. But to this day, no psychiatrist has found any evidence of psychosis in Sirhan, which scientists consider another possible cause of amnesia. Melanson became convinced that Sirhan's lack of memory is the result of being hypnotized and programmed to kill.
After 15 years of analyzing the evidence and interviewing experts and witnesses, the only logical conclusion in this case, from my mind, is that Sirhan was a programmed assassin, programmed to show up shooting at Robert Kennedy, and programmed not to remember.
Is the programmed assassination theory merely the plot of a Hollywood movie? Or is it really possible to hypnotize someone to kill? Dr. Herbert Spiegel is one of the world's leading experts on hypnosis. He has taught hypnosis at the Columbia University Medical School for over 20 years and is the inventor of the standardized test for measuring a subject's hypnotizability. He believes there is circumstantial evidence that suggests Sirhan Sirhan was hypnotized to kill.
The total and complete amnesia that Sirhan demonstrated from the very beginning to this very day suggests strongly that he was A, highly hypnotizable, and B, programmed to perform that act.
Hypnosis played a major role in Sirhan's trial, as psychiatrists for the defense and prosecution hypnotized Sirhan at least 6 times in an effort to unlock his memory.
You're right in the kitchen now.
In one session under hypnosis, Sirhan was induced to reenact the shooting.
Look, Senator Kennedy is here.
The psychiatrist reported that Sirhan nearly choked as he relived being strangled, just as in his actual capture.
Stay away from the gun.
This incident is one of many that Dr. Spiegel found in his review of the court psychiatrist's reports that lead him to believe that Sirhan falls into the highest category of hypnotizability.
Only about 5 to 10% of the population are that highly hypnotizable. He comes under the category of what might be called the hypnotic virtuosos.
In fact, Sirhan's high hypnotizability, which allowed him to slip into spontaneous trances, was the basis of the defense's argument. His lawyers argued that Sirhan involuntarily shifted into a hypnotic trance and therefore carried out the assassination without planning it ahead of time. The possibility that someone else may have hypnotized Sirhan was never presented in court. But Dr. Spiegel believes that the circumstantial evidence, Sirhan's desire to be hypnotized, his extreme compliance under hypnosis, his amnesia to the assassination event, all suggest that Sirhan appears to be an ideal candidate to be hypnotized. But can someone be hypnotized to kill?
Yes, it is possible to instruct a highly hypnotizable person to perform many acts, including assassination.
For the past 10 years, this eminent Californian lawyer has been investigating the links between hypnosis, the American security agencies, and murder.
Can hypnosis be used to influence people to commit illegal or immoral acts?
There's generally a folklore that it can't be so used, and I think the reason for the folklore, for one, is to discourage people from trying, and two, because it took a while for hypnosis to establish itself as a valid therapeutic technique. Now that we know that it is a valid therapeutic technique, we can also see that just as it can be used for good, it can be used for evil. For example, in 1954, 4 years before the Manchurian Candidate novel had been published, the Central Intelligence Agency had a team to build Manchurian candidates to commit assassinations. And one of the most frightening memos that I've read is an experiment that they wanted to run to be able to program somebody to assassinate a foreign head of state or an American official.
Surely this is just some conspiracy theory. What evidence is there to really support this?
I'm interested in the historical fact, and the historical fact for me has come from Central Intelligence Agency documents. And the documents definitely establish that by 1954, the CIA, or at least the component that did the hypnosis research, was convinced that they could program people into committing assassinations. A more recent experimentation by the Central Intelligence Agency suggests that they have conducted a series of what they call terminal experiments. And these are experiments which will end in the death of the subjects. In one set of letters from the CIA to a researcher, they asked the researcher if he would be willing to conduct terminal experiments. And the researcher said he'd do it for free.
Sniper, aren't you? Sniper. Why did you try to kill me? I had to kill him. I had to. Oh, snap out of it. Stop it, Watson. He's shamming. No, he isn't. Who told you to kill me? She told me. She told you? She told me I couldn't miss. Well, luckily you did miss, you murderer. Isn't a murderer, Watson? Listen, Corporal Williams. She told you you had to do it, didn't she? I had to do it. I've got it, Watson, I've got it. Got what? The method used in the finger murders. Well, what is it? Hypnotism, my dear fellow, hypnotism.
This eerie, foreboding structure, also known as Ravenscrag, became a house of psychological horrors, all under the watchful eye of one of the world's leading physicians, Dr. Ewan Cameron.
The story of Dr. Ewan Cameron is one of the most tragic, but one of the most clearly visible stories of what happened during the mind control experimentation days.
Using unknowing Canadian citizens as test subjects, Cameron had developed a new procedure which caught the eye of the MK Ultra researchers, as well as the Canadian intelligence community. He was hired by the CIA and the Canadian government to further explore the treatment, which he called psychic driving.
First, Cameron proposed that they would use intensive electroshock and LSD and other disorienting drugs to, in his terms, de-pattern individuals, basically to wipe the slate clean. Second, using tape-recorded messages, try to program in new behaviors by repeating these messages hundreds of thousands of times, while the victim was immobilized with other drugs. And the final phase was to try to wipe the slate clean so that people could not, again, remember what had happened to them, but still have the new behavior.
The psychic driving experiments literally reduced the person to a vegetable. One of the group of people was a man called Robert Logie, who lives in Vancouver. He was also a victim of these psychic driving experiments where tape loops were played countless hours per day, many months in a row.
I heard 4 words, and it's very hard for me to say. The 4 words I remember where you killed your mother.
None of this, of course, was therapeutic. None of it was warranted by the conditions under which the people had gone to the institute. None of it was done with consent, and none of it was done with the awareness of the people that they were experimental guinea pigs in an advanced brainwashing experiment.
Another of Cameron's patients who endured months of mental torture was Linda MacDonald.
I think there were about 80 of us. We discovered that these 80 people were just ordinary, everyday people. It could have been you, it could have been me, it was me. It could have been anybody who just walked through the doors of the Allen Memorial on the wrong day at the wrong time when Dr. Cameron needed another schizophrenic for his fun little stuff upstairs.
Linda MacDonald started off as a pretty much normal person. She basically came into the hospital as a mother with many young children who was a little overwhelmed and depressed for just routine psychiatric treatment.
And 3 weeks after I was there, I was shipped up to the sleep ward. And I came out of there a vegetable 5 months later.
By the time someone was in the sleep room, the ability of that individual to remember or describe what happened to them was very limited. So the descriptions that there are from nurses and from other people who worked at the facility, and their descriptions are, to quote one, like something out of Dante's Inferno.
Within the walls of this living hell, patients would be subjected to electroshock therapy that went well beyond the professionally accepted guidelines of 4 to 8 treatments.
I received a total of 109 electroconvulsive shock treatments. In less than 5 weeks, I had 86 straight comatose days where I was completely out of it. The purpose for all of this was to wipe my memory, to take a life, to wipe it completely clean. So I would not have a memory ever. When I came out of the treatment and they had decided that my memory was wiped sufficiently, I didn't know who I was. I was a baby. They had to toilet train me, and they had to teach me to walk and talk and feed myself.
She has absolutely zero direct memory of her life before age 25. Now, it doesn't take long to figure out why the CIA or other intelligence agencies would be interested in such research.
Well, if Cameron can get it to work for a psychiatric patient, well, then they can use the same thing to deprogram somebody and put them back together for a brainwashing scenario.
It would not be until years later, after an emotional divorce from her husband and the painful loss of custody of her children, that Linda McDonald would learn of the hidden purpose behind the treatment she had received.
This big headline saying, Dr. Cameron, CIA, brainwashing experiments, and I stopped breathing for a minute. You could have knocked me over. I knew Dr. Cameron was my doctor. I knew I had been at the Allen Memorial. But up until that moment, I believed, because that's what I was told, that the doctor had fixed me, had done to me great things, and I was lucky that he had been my doctor. So I couldn't not read the article, and as I read it, I was just horrified.
My participation in it was in terms of trying to evaluate the behavior that was described. I don't think I can add anything that hasn't already been. Frankly, it's an area I don't like to talk about. It's not that but I don't like to talk about it.
This is the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, one of Canada's most highly respected psychiatric hospitals. In 1956, the director of psychiatry here was Dr. Ewan Cameron, one of the country's most highly regarded psychiatrists. Patients were referred to him by doctors from all over the world. Dr. Cameron was doing research of his own in the field of brainwashing. He was fascinated by the mind control he had heard described in countries behind the Iron Curtain. The CIA was fascinated too. The court case alleged that the CIA backed Dr. Cameron's horrific experiments that were conducted on more than 70 patients, forcing them to endure 3 tormenting phases of so-called treatment. First, according to the complaint, Dr. Cameron and others would give patients mind-altering drugs like LSD and angel dust. They would mask them and force them to inhale laughing gas. They would give them high-voltage electric shocks several times a day, effectively turning the patients into vegetables. Once the patients were immobilized, Dr. Cameron would play what were called psychic driving tapes, messages that were repeated up to 500,000 times. Finally, Dr. Cameron would put the patients to sleep with massive amounts of barbiturates. These sleep episodes could last 50 days or longer.
They took me in a room outside the ward, in a very little room, and they put 3 or 4 pillows at the end of the bed, and there were 4 doctors at the end of the bed there, and one doctor was putting me a mask there. The doctor started from left to right there, telling me, kill him, 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 kill him. What did they want to make me kill? I'll never know. They never told me, I don't know.
By the early 1970s, word of the CIA's mind control atrocities began to leak out to the public. An investigation was launched, resulting in the creation of 1 presidential commission and 2 Senate committees.
And my feeling now is that the CIA had overall powers that put them in a different situation than other people.
The American public was in shock.
I am terribly upset that the system is such that what happened could happen.
Their search for answers, however, would soon hit a dead end, as investigators learned that Dr. Sidney Gottlieb had destroyed the majority of the documents relating to the MK-Ultra program. It was now impossible for the American public to discover the truth about what the CIA learned from its mind control research. Officially, the agency's position would be that 30 years of aggressive experimentation had yielded few, if any, productive results.
You know what day it is today, Cap?
Yeah.
What? What day of the week?
Wait a minute, don't bug me.
Sirhan's own diary does repeatedly refer to mind control.
You say that Sirhan was programmed, controlled, almost brainwashed to kill Robert Kennedy. It sounds like science fiction. As a matter of fact, it sounds like you watched the Manchurian Candidate movie one time too many.
What people don't understand about the Manchurian Candidate theory and the movie is that that movie was based on Condon's conversations, as I understand it, with people who were actually involved in CIA mind control research.
But if one concedes that a hypno-programmed assassin is a possibility, what evidence is there that Sirhan was in some sort of trance at the time of the murder?
I think the best evidence for Sirhan's hypno-programming comes from, first of all, his behavior before, during, and after the crime. This spacey demeanor and his chills afterwards, his blocking sensation when being interrogated. There's the fact that he was the perfect hypnotic subject, and that was easily demonstrated by his doctors. And then there is the bizarre fact that he genuinely could not recall the crime, how he got there, how the shooting unfolded, so that the tracks of programming really seem to be there in Sirhan's behavior and memory loss.
Witnesses in the pantry at the Ambassador Hotel would seem to support Dr. Melanson's conclusions. During the shooting itself, Sirhan summoned extraordinary strength as he fought Roosevelt Grier and Rayford Johnson, who were unable to pry the gun from his hand for almost 40 seconds. Feats of unusual strength are often associated with hypnotic trances. Yet despite the shooting and the struggle that followed, onlookers were taken aback by the contented look on the gunman's face. In The Manchurian Candidate, robot assassin Raymond Shaw commits murder without any memory of his deed. As a cinematic plot device, this is perfectly acceptable, but otherwise it's a very bizarre notion. Yet here, in the person of Sirhan, we have this unlikely circumstance. A perpetrator caught gun in hand who apparently, genuinely, cannot remember anything about the murder. He never claimed that he didn't do it. He didn't say he shouldn't be punished. He says only that he cannot remember. His memory of the evening stops as he is having coffee with a pretty girl and begins again with people pounding on him after the shooting. Listen to the plaintive words of the defendant's mother, Mary Sirhan.
I asked him, I said, son, will you tell me why did you do that? His tears began to drop. He said, Mama, I'm sorry. I don't remember anything. I was told that I killed Senator Robert Kennedy.
The defendant's inability to recall anything about the assassination led to a most bizarre scene in Sirhan's jail cell before the trial, as Dr. Seymour Pollack, psychiatrist for the prosecution, and Dr. Bernard Diamond, psychiatrist for the defense, together hypnotized Sirhan in an effort to get him to remember the crime.
And you see Kennedy coming. Now what do you see, Sirhan? You're back in the kitchen now. What do you see? Sit down. What's he doing here? What? That son of a bitch. You son of a bitch. You're talking to Kennedy. She's coming. Reach for your gun, Sirhan. It's your last chance, Sirhan. Reach for your gun. Where is your gun? Where is your gun? Reach for it. Reach for it, Sirhan. Reach for your gun. Reach for your gun. Sirhan, take the gun out and shoot it. Who are you shooting, Sirhan? Who are you shooting? You're shooting Kennedy now, huh?
Of course, one might wonder at what point a session like this stops becoming a search for recollection and instead becomes a memory implant. Listen as Sirhan is being brought out of his trance.
Sirhan, you had wanted to remember the shooting of Kennedy. You wanted to remember your shooting. Now you'll remember shooting him. You'll remember taking the gun out, pulling the trigger again and again and again. You'll remember all of this. You'll remember all of it. All of this will get clearer and clearer, become clearer and clearer, and you'll remember all of it. You'll remember it all.
But as a subsequent solo interview with prosecution psychiatrist Dr. Seymour Pollack reveals, the forces against Sirhan's remembering were so strong as to resist even this hypnotic suggestion.
In my opinion, Sirhan, I don't think you have any chance. I really don't. I don't. Because the jury, listening, will be negative rather than positive to you if you don't remember. Now, I say this, and I don't want you to fake. I don't want you to make up anything.
You hypnotize me, and whatever I say under hypnosis, or under this truth serum, whatever the hell it is, I will say it when I'm conscious. But right now, as I speak to you now, sir, I have no recollection.
The thing that bothers me is that you say you don't even remember any part of it, anything you've written there. Not a single damn thing. That bothers me. How could you carry a gun from your car back to the Ambassador Hotel and not know that you had it? What did you think it was in there? Applesauce?
In his solo jail cell interview with Sirhan Sirhan, prosecution psychiatrist Dr. Seymour Pollack seems genuinely disturbed by Sirhan's lack of memory. But, as we shall hear, that fact doesn't prevent him from coaching the prisoner on what his motive might have been. Sirhan, however, remains confused. Maybe I am crazy, he says. I don't know what to tell you. I just can't explain it. Pollack then reminds him that other people were wounded, and Sirhan, hardly sounding like a murdering fanatic, responds, "What did they do to me that they had to be hurt?"
That's the picture I've gotten from you, the feelings about you, this intense Arab nationalist who feels the American political figures letting the Arab world down. In other words, your trial is a trial in which you are self-accusing America of burying a million Arabs. In fact, if I assume then that this is so, that you really want the world to see the Arabs suffering and to see that American policy has helped that suffering, why, I say, don't you remember all of this? Why don't you remember clearly?
Maybe I am. Maybe I am. Maybe I don't know it. And I'm not trying to tell you that it was snowy, but really, I can't explain it.
You know, a number of other people were shot too, were wounded, you know that, don't you?
What did they do to me that they had to be hurt?
I think that you had this pretty blind rage, anger, resentment. I mean, to you, at that time, Kennedy was really the biggest bastard in the world. He was the biggest son of a bitch.
Pollack here seems not to understand that he has asked a key question. If Sirhan murdered Robert Kennedy to make a political gesture on behalf of the dispossessed Palestinian Arabs, why doesn't he remember? And why such remorse? My own conscience doesn't agree with what I did, Sirhan says sadly. In what way? Pollack asks, taken aback. It's against my upbringing, says Sirhan. My childhood, family, church, prayers, the Bible and all this, sir. Sirhan, as many people don't know, was a Christian. Now returning to the quote. And here I go and splatter this guy's brains. It's just not me. It's just not me.
My own conscience doesn't agree with me with what I did.
Your own conscience?
My own conscience doesn't agree.
In what way?
It's against my upbringing, my very nature, sir. My childhood, you know, my family, the church, and prayer, and the Bible, and all this, thou shalt not kill him. And here I go and splatter this guy's brains. It's just not me.
If we accept for the moment the possibility that Sirhan Sirhan was a remote control assassin, the question then arises as to who could have programmed him. Suspicion has fallen in recent years on a small group of West Coast doctors who were active in secret CIA mind control experiments. The most flamboyant of these was the late Dr. William Bryan. Again, Dr. Philip Melanson.
William Bryan was, by his own admission, one of the primary researchers for the government in brainwashing, in hypnoprogramming, and in a variety of things. He was an out-of-control, super hypno character who exploited women through his hypnosis practice and was temporarily disbarred as a result. He bragged about his work for the government, said he was the czar of brainwashing, and he was also involved with the man I call Reasoner and with another man, all of whom worked together in Southern and Northern California, all of whom worked for the government, and my belief is that 2 of them, if not 3 of them, had something to do with Sirhan's programming.
William Bryan was a rather large man weighing 386 pounds. He has been variously referred to as the most brilliant man in the field of hypnotism and as a, quote, misguided genius. His private practice involved sex therapy, and by his own admission, he frequently had sex with his female patients. Did William Bryan believe that a subject could be programmed to perform acts that were out of character? Let's listen.
You have to have the person locked up physically, and there is also the use of long-term hypnotic suggestion, probably drugs, whatever, and so on. Under these situations where you have all this going for you, yes, you can brainwash a person to do just about anything.
Did William Bryan have anything at all to do with Robert Kennedy's accused killer? Well, in the year before his death in 1976, Bryan reportedly bragged to 2 prostitutes who serviced him regularly that he had, in fact, hypnotized Sirhan. Bryan also liked to brag about his most crowning achievement, the deprogramming of Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler. In Sirhan's notebook, that strange document with page after page of almost indecipherable trance-induced scribbling, there appears the entry, "God help me, please help me. Salvo, di salvo, die salvo." It's a curious notation to be sure, but is it possible that while working upon Sirhan, the programmer couldn't help talking about his favorite subject? And that this entry, by way of the captured mind of Sirhan, is really the palm print of Dr. William Bryan? If we take Sirhan's words, "It's just not me," at face value, then who was it? What bad dream befell this young man?
It's my handwriting. They are my thoughts, but I don't remember them. They are the writings of a maniac. They're not the writings of me now.
In the spring of 1992, a petition was brought before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury requesting the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate the Los Angeles Police Department for willful and corrupt misconduct in its investigation of the murder of Robert Kennedy. This request was signed by over 50 notables, including Arthur Schlesinger Jr., Frank Mankiewicz, Norman Mailer, Sam Dash, Cesar Chavez, and Oliver Stone. It was accompanied by 800 pages of exhibits documenting the LAPD's destruction of evidence, falsification of evidence, and coercion of witnesses. Whether this request will ever be adequately acted upon is uncertain. It is, though, a near certainty that those who conspired to murder Robert Kennedy will never be apprehended or brought to justice. On the other hand, historians a century from now will not have to examine these events through the filter of political expedience. They will see a conspiratorial mosaic, incomplete but unmistakable.
I think it's possible to brainwash, manipulate, coerce people to do just about anything. And we see this demonstrated in military training or in the kind of conditioning that people go through when they get involved in cults. And they do things that are certainly way outside of the normal parameters of what they would consider moral.
Nowhere was this more evident than in the small South American country of Guyana in the winter of 1978. The place was called Jonestown. On the surface, it appeared to be a gathering of ethnically diverse families assembled by the Reverend Jim Jones to live their dream of a racially harmonious society.
This reporter spoke to many Jonestown people. They all insisted that it was a peaceful and productive place in which to live.
Are you happy here?
Oh, I should say I am. I've never been any happier in my life.
Despite the outward appearance of normality, reports of sexual abuse, torture, and members being held against their will filtered back to the United States. San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Guyana to investigate the allegations.
I'm very glad to be here. This is a congressional inquiry, and I think that all of you know that I'm here to find out more about questions that have been raised about your operation here. But I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them their whole life.
The events of the following day would shock the world.
Love is the only weapon. Shit! Bullshit! Martin Luther King died with love. Kennedy died talking about something you couldn't even understand, some kind of generalized love, and he never even backed it up. He shut down. Bullshit! Love is the only weapon with which I got to fight. I got a hell of a lot of weapons to fight. I got my claws, I got compasses, I got guns, I got dynamite, I got a hell of a lot to fight. I'll fight, I'll fight, I will fight, I will fight, I will fight, I will fight.
Some 20 years later, Jonestown still raises as many questions as it does answers. Was it a mass suicide or a mass murder? Was it a mind control experiment gone awry? Was the CIA somehow involved? While still a teenager, Jones established a pulpit on the street corners of Richmond, Indiana, where he sold monkeys door to door in order to fund his activities. There he came to know a juvenile police officer named Dan Matrone, whose improbable path Jones would cross and recross in the years ahead. By the late 1950s, Jones had married his high school sweetheart, Marceline, and established an interracial church based in Indianapolis. He called it the People's Temple. At first, the church prospered, but Jones had a secret life. Matrone left Richmond and joined a sometime CIA cover at the State Department. Coincidentally or not, Jones suddenly became of deep interest to the most clandestine department of the agency, whose activities included mind control experiments, attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro, and operations to infiltrate and disrupt black organizations. For reasons that the CIA has always refused to explain, they opened a secret file in Jones' name. Suddenly, Jones abandoned his church, and armed with 2 passports, the young charismatic preacher traveled to a series of political hotspots: Mexico, Cuba, Guyana, and Brazil. Though he spoke no Portuguese, in 1962, Jones moved to Belo Horizonte, a small town in Brazil. With no apparent means of support, he rented an expensive house and began to make in-depth studies into voodoo, faith healing, mass conversion, and ESP, a key investigative element of the CIA's mind control program. But Jones was not the only person there from Richmond, Indiana. He later bragged of visits to his neighbor, Dan Matrone. The former police chief was now working for a sometime CIA cover at the U.S. consulate, training Brazilian police in the subtleties of hostile interrogation. Jones was also contacted by another key member of American intelligence at that time, John Lodison, who'd been kicked out of the Soviet Union for spying. In Brazil, he met with Jones for reasons that the CIA still refuses to explain. But Jones' stay in Brazil did not last. He left the country soon after a newspaper article appeared claiming he was a CIA agent. Returning to the USA, Jones moved the People's Temple to Northern California, where its membership grew rapidly.
Jones flourished in San Francisco's cult-worshipping atmosphere. Membership in his People's Temple swelled to nearly 20,000 as his reputation grew, and he started food kitchens and daycare centers. He particularly targeted minorities. Believing that the ends justified the means, he put on fake displays of healing and said that he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ.
Put your snide on every dollar. You asked and begged and pleaded for help with your suffering, and he never gave you any food. He never provided a bed. He never gave you a home. But I, the socialist worker, have given you all those things. Stop sick. And you won't die if you trust him. You will die if you stand up. You will die if you jump up and down. Because I
freedom. I'm peace. I'm justice. I'm equality. I am God.
Using classic brainwashing techniques, he bound his followers to him so that they willingly gave him whatever property and money they had.
I can't imagine importance of privacy. You know, the most discriminated against perhaps of any group. I really don't feel comfortable with our worship being photographed. I really don't. I must go against the entire council. I don't feel good about it. They can photograph me all they choose, because I do not care. I'm fearless. I come unafraid of anything, but I don't want the cameras focusing on others. I don't want them. Focus on me all you want. I owe something to my people, and that's to be a good pastor, and that I am. The best I am.
His services were dazzling affairs, with soul and gospel singers, dance groups, and celebrity preachers like black revolutionary Angela Davis. The size of his congregation gave him a political power base. During the 1976 presidential election campaign, he allegedly provided support for the Democrats and met the presidential candidate's wife. Local politicians sought his support, and he became a member of the city's housing commission.
People from all walks of life were just fascinated by Jim Jones. I mean, I remember going to a testimonial dinner. Who was there at the dinner? You got Angela Davis, the communist, and you have Walter Heady, the chairman of the John Birch Society. And then you had the lieutenant governor of the state of California, you had the mayor, you had the DA, you had the chief of police, you had the supervisors, you had businessmen. They were all there at this meeting, and I thought, Jim, you got your act
He'd
together.
bring all of these people in, and he himself would come in the midst of a smaller a retinue of aides. They'd shoo him to the front of the room, put him on the center of the chair, and basically sort of guard him the whole time. Guys in dark glasses, black suits, the whole thing. It was very unusual.
Jonestown was in its 4th year when Jones arrived in 1977. Conditions had never been easy, but when he took over, the agricultural mission became a labor camp.
Well, Jim had armed guards. I mean, young men and women who were told that they needed to watch everybody, and it kept you working hard. We headed out to the fields, and you vied to go really far out, actually, because you couldn't hear Jim over the loudspeakers.
Jonestown was wired with loudspeakers, and Jim spoke 24 hours a day on it. When he wasn't speaking, the tapes that they'd made of him speaking played on and on and on.
And Jim would make these announcements, and he'd say, I'm sending out some children and some of my aides and other people you won't know who they are to pretend they want to leave. And it's a test. It's a loyalty test. And if anyone comes to you, you're to report them.
You didn't know who it would be, so you just never put the place down, and how much you enjoyed it there, how much you loved the place, and how great he was, and how Father was so nice, and you had to call him Father. You just never said anything bad about the place, because if you did, you would be coming up there that night.
They also told of full-scale rehearsals for mass suicide in the jungle.
I'll talk to psychiatrists, whatever, but I believe I was brainwashed.
But we do understand that it's extremely difficult for anyone to comprehend people being in a cult group, standing by, watching their daughter being beat 75 times as I did, watching children being beat, microphones held to their mouth while they're screaming so that everyone throughout the building that are not in a public meeting can hear them scream also. Going through electric shock treatment where they're screaming. It's incredibly difficult for anyone to believe a story like this.
There are SWAT teams consisting of 50 young men and women dressed in khaki. There's 2 teams of 25 each that are armed with 200 to 300 guns, and that they patrol all day and all night the whole encampment, and that Jim Jones has stated publicly that nobody better try to escape from here because you will be shot.
The methods that Jim Jones used in his cult, the People's Temple, are definitely classical mind control techniques. According to a book by Michael Myers, which is called Was Jonestown a CIA Medical Experiment, his documentation leads him to conclude that actually Jonestown was run by the CIA. Prior to being Jonestown in the deep jungles of British Guiana, that site was actually under control of what was called the Shalom Project. This was a CIA program for training black mercenaries for warfare in Angola.
I'd gone through a false mass suicide. I went through one talk and I went through one where we actually took a drink and we were told we had an hour to live so that Jones could find out how people would react psychologically.
Turning Jonestown's children against his own enemies was standard practice for Jim Jones, and it delighted him.
I like to kill Gray Stone and Tim Stone. I'll go back and do it right now.
I think that I should take a knife and cut Mr. Tupper all up real good and put poison in him and invite all my relatives over there and have them eat him, and then I'll die.
It was terror. It was living terror living inside Jonestown.
Deborah Layton had escaped Jonestown a few months earlier with bizarre tales of mind control, armed guards, and suicide rehearsals. They are recounted in her new book, Seductive Poison.
The suicide drills were the most frightening and disturbing things there, that we would be awakened from the middle of a dreamless sleep to Jim's voice screaming over the loudspeaker that we were going to die, that we had to come to the pavilion, that mercenaries were coming in to kill us.
She put her concerns in a sworn affidavit to the U.S. State Department months before Congressman Ryan's trip. Congressman Ryan and the journalist arrived in Guyana on Tuesday, November 14th, 1978.
Well, he was such a kind man, so compassionate, didn't get excited about nothing. Oh, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. Just take it easy. It'll be fine. That's just the way he was.
For some time, Ryan had been a thorn in the side of the CIA. He had recently pushed through congressional legislation that curtailed the agency's covert foreign activities. As Ryan prepared for a first-hand look at Jonestown, he was joined by a State Department agent, Richard Dwyer. What he didn't know was that Dwyer was working undercover.
A man named Dwyer was the head of the CIA here. I mean, the CIA had a presence here. It was an unrevealed presence at the time.
I had a premonition about the trip. There was something that just made me feel a great deal of uncertainty.
In 1978, Jackie Spear was the legal aid to San Francisco area Congressman Leo Ryan. They were about to embark on a fact-finding trip to look into reports of abuse and brainwashing at the remote jungle compound known as Jonestown.
I always kind of shake my head in disbelief when they refer to it as a suicide. Those people were not in control of their minds. They had been brainwashed.
The next day, 20 temple members decided they wanted to leave. In a haze of drugs, Jones' world began to fall apart.
Jones reacted angrily when shown a note from a cult member asking the party for help to get away.
Someone came and passed me this note.
Well, that's who we're talking about. He wants to leave his son here. If Jonestown's such a bad place, why does he want to leave his son here? He's the one that I'm just talking about. Yeah, this is the man that wants to leave his son here. People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't.
But he said goodbye, apparently calmly. Then he whispered to one of his lieutenants. As the party reached the airport, a man with a knife tried to stab Ryan. The congressman described the attack.
Yeah, he said something about rob and choke and kill and or knife. I don't know. But what he said was he intended to kill me.
The party had now been joined by about 30 cult members who wanted to get away, and the enlarged party walked out towards the aircraft. Congressman Ryan went over to shake the pilot's hand. As the party waited, a tractor and trailer appeared in the background. Hidden men opened fire. Congressman Ryan, 2 reporters and an NBC cameraman were killed. Several other journalists and defectors were injured.
One man who was not executed at the airstrip was Richard Dwyer, the undercover CIA man from the American Embassy, seen here peeling off from Ryan's party seconds before the tractor arrives. Where Dwyer was in the next few hours is key to one of the mysteries that still lies at the heart of the Jonestown tragedy. Having dealt with Congressman Ryan, Jones now turned his insanity on the Temple's faithful.
At this point in time, Jonestown had become surreal. Almost everything that was going on seemed surreal to me. I mean, by this time, I pretty much figured out this guy was mad. But he said, I've never seen or felt Jonestown so peaceful or quiet. And I remember getting a chill just course through my body because Jonestown had never been in more agony, had never been so less together.
From his seat in the pavilion, Jones recorded the last desperate hour of the People's Temple. In front of him, more than 900 of his followers, who were surrounded by guards holding rifles and crossbows. For all but a few, there was no escape. Subsequent medical examinations revealed that many of the dead had been murdered, held down, and injected with cyanide. Jones himself was one of the last to die. A single gunshot to the head sometime around midnight. His killer has never been known. At 3:30 in the morning, when everyone was dead and several hours before anyone arrived, a radio message was sent from Jonestown using a secret CIA channel, reporting what it described as a mass suicide. This was the message that shaped our view of Jonestown for years to come, even though the best medical evidence suggests that most of those who died had been murdered. The question then becomes who sent that message. The only functioning radio in the area belonged to the local American intelligence officer, Richard Dwyer. Though he always denied going back to Jonestown that night, the last tape tells a very different story.
Take Dwyer on down to the east house. Get Dwyer out of here before something happens to him. Dwyer? I'm not talking about you, Dara. I said Dwyer.
Though more than 900 Americans had died, Richard Dwyer and other U.S. Embassy officials would later receive medals and promotions. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit was subsequently filed by Congressman Ryan's daughter and the relatives of those who died. The suit described the deaths as a massacre and alleged that Jones was an agent or operative of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was dismissed on a technicality and never tried.
Here's more from Bob Jimenez in Guyana.
Recovery teams have been removing the dead from Jonestown since Wednesday. Today, as the recovery operation neared what appeared to be the end, the miscalculation was realized. There were not 400 bodies as first thought, but nearly twice that number. Some were found alongside a temple where recovery teams were just starting to work. Air Force Captain John Muscatelli talked to reporters.
The original count of persons found dead at the Jonestown site has been found to be seriously in error. It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site. They were found simply buried under other bodies. There were larger adults that were grouped together, and under their bodies were found the bodies of smaller adults and children.
But the medical team were not the only people in Jonestown that day. During the immediate aftermath, Jeff Braley was approached by a man in civilian clothes who asked him to guard a large box of documents.
And he said, I'm from the U.S. Embassy. If anybody tries to take this box away from me, shoot them. And I said, you got to be out of your mind. I'm not going to shoot anybody. And he told me that the box was full of sensitive documents and he needed to get those to the U.S. Embassy. I think he probably was CIA.
The documents then disappeared into the CIA, and their contents remain secret to this day. 20 years later, the CIA continues to deny any interest in the People's Temple. They claim that their own file on Jones is empty. But new evidence reveals startling connections between Jones and members of the U.S. intelligence community.
It began with a visit to Guyana by Congressman Leo Ryan, some of his staff, and members of the press. He was later killed, along with 4 other Americans, including Don Harris and Robert Brown of NBC News. After the killings, the Guyanese authorities impounded the first tapes and notes made by the NBC crew.
I had appeared on a public television several months ago with a group of black professionals, mostly psychologists and doctors. They invited me to appear today to provide information that they thought might be that I might be able to help with this forum today, with their research. I appeared in Washington in February before the International Relations Committee and made some statements and some charges and documentation which resulted in the Foreign Affairs Committee, or International Relations Committee, which they call it today. They voted to ask the House Select Committee on Intelligence to investigate my charges. And they are currently investigating those charges by the House Select Committee on Intelligence.
Can you tell us what the charges are?
Well, the charges basically amounted to CIA contact with both the Burnham government there and with the People's Temple. That originally, it was my belief at the time I went to Washington that the purpose of our involvement there was to support the government of Burnham for commercial reasons, and they used the People's Temple almost as enforcers to help support an unpopular government there to keep control of the government of Guyana. We knew that there had been an article in the San Mateo Times in December of '79 which indicated that the Deputy Chief of Mission there, Richard Dwyer, was in fact the CIA station chief. He was the one that went to Jonestown with Leo's party, and he claimed to be slightly wounded, but there was a tape made at the time of the murders and suicides there with Jones yelling, "Get Dwyer out of here, get Dwyer out of here." And the indications are that it was Dwyer who went back into Jonestown after Leo was murdered and was there at the time. And there's great questions just who shot Jim Jones and why, whether Jones was shot to shut him up. The question also as to how all these people died and just when they died, which is all documented here. But soon I came back from Washington, because of my testimony, I started getting documentation from a Berkeley psychologist called the Penal Colony here, and from the Alliance for Preservation of Religious Liberty in Washington, which indicated other things, one of which was that George Philip Blakey was a top Jones aide. He was the man who arranged the purchase or the lease of the land in Guyana, provided the money and arranged the lease down there in 1974. He also is tracked now as being a CIA operative in Angola in 1975 with UNITA. He's also the same guy who was the top aide who arranged all this purchase and the finances, is also the husband of Deborah Layton Blakey, who fled Jonestown and made those charges. He's a brother-in-law of Larry Layton, who was acquitted yesterday. And it's interesting to note the Peninsula Times Tribune says yesterday the jury appeared, in acquitting Layton, the jury appeared to have agreed with the defense contention that Layton was brainwashed and drugged at the time of the shootings, could not be held criminally responsible. But the gist of what I'm getting to is this. I've received a lot of documentation, which I will value here today, that indicates the strong possibility that Jonestown and the People's Temple was in reality a mass mind control experiment conducted by the CIA as a follow-up to something called MK Ultra, which they conducted from the early 50s through 1974. They used to use the VA hospital and state hospitals. They used the federal and state penitentiaries for their experiments.
Do you think that Jim Jones was actively involved with the CIA?
I do now.
Do you have any conclusions as to how the people died in Jonestown?
Yes, I have part of our documentation here is a report from which is attached here. The chief medical examiner in Guyana is a Dr. Leslie Moto. He reported, and this is attached here, his opinion that more than 700 of those bodies found at Jonestown were not suicide victims but were murdered. He based this on the injection marks in the upper arm. Page 4 of my statement here.
By injection, they said?
Yes, and by gunfire. There were a lot more people killed by gunfire than they've ever admitted so far. We have heard reports that there were 50 of them, approximately 50 men with guns ringing around there, so people couldn't get out, and very few of them did get out. So it's according to the chief medical officer in Guyana, most of the people down there were murdered rather than suicide.
Who is suppressing all of this? Are you implying the CIA was active in the suppression?
Yes, I'm suggesting to you that a lot of things that don't make sense here. I'm suggesting that the long delay in anyone getting in, or the press getting in there, or very many people all getting in there for several days, was caused by a deliberate attempt to manufacture the story, which has now been accepted and sold successfully to the American people.
And what is that story that you think the people are falsely accepting?
That, in effect, this was a large group of disillusioned or disoriented black people who went down to Guyana and who turned their backs on this country and committed suicide, and we might as well we're get rid of them, and that was just an aberration type of thing. I think that's the story that's been peddled. When you see the documentation here, you'll begin to wonder yourselves why the first reports were 350 people died or 400 people died, and for several days that was reported, and then they started finding more bodies. When the first reports were that 500 fled in the jungle, the people examined the bodies the first time and counted them by name, by types of people, men, women, and children, turned them over. Then a few days later, they claimed to have found 2 and 3 stacks of bodies underneath those. You know, it boggles the mind, the stories that were passed out, but they apparently have gotten away with, I think, with one of the greatest fabrications of recent years.
What significance do you attach to the fact that the leadership of the temple was largely white and the membership of the temple was largely black?
I mentioned that in here. I think that that's part and parcel of the whole thing. I think that this is what caused me very suspicious about this whole experiment, about the possibilities here. The cadre was all white, and yet we think of Jonestown as a bunch of black people who were committed suicide without mentioning that white cadre, and that doesn't quite add up. I think there are racist overtones to the whole thing.
What kind of racist overtones? What are you exactly alleging?
I'm alleging that the media picture that was printed, it was painted rather, and then came out in print and so on, was that you don't have to worry about these people because they're crazy, they'll do anything, and they're not like us. It's my impression at this time that they were conducting some sort of mind control experiments. For example, they had a very modern hospital down there which they bragged about. So modern that in that population they had medical checkups for everyone every day. So there's no need for that unless you're conducting experiments where you're having control groups and you're giving people, and they're giving their vitamins every day. And it's my guess that they were just using them as guinea pigs to see what they could do under isolated circumstances. They take them off into a jungle someplace far away from everybody. They get them there somehow, and then they're able to see how these various drugs work on different groups.
Could you tell us about the details of the murders in Guyana, exactly how they were killed, please?
Well, Dr. Mutu, the pathologist at the site in Jonestown, said that 70 to 80% of the bodies had a fresh needle mark in the back of the left shoulder blade at a point they could not have reached themselves, and that the body showed evidence of having been forced to take the shots. And the official coroner's verdict from Matthews Ridge by the Guyanese judge and jury that looked into the situation was that all the people had been murdered, that not one had been a suicide. Mutu found evidence of gunshot wounds and strangulation in many of the other bodies. I studied about 150 pictures in which I could see gunshot wounds. There's no way that cyanide pathology explains the condition of those bodies all face down, and you could see drag marks, and the body count went up because the area was surrounded by 350 Guyanese troops, about 200 British Black Watch troops, which are the equivalent of their Green Beret, on maneuvers at Matthews Ridge in those days, and American Green Berets that came in with the body cleanup teams that spent the period of the 5 days murdering people, rounding them up in the jungle. The original reports were all 408 dead, and then 700 flee into the woods. And the military said, first, the Guianese can't count. Second, that it was bodies on top of bodies, though how you start with 408 and end up with 915 and say that the 400 covered the 500 makes no sense. They said bodies in little piles. They even said at the end, after they'd been there for 6 days, that they forgot to go around to the back of the pavilion and there were 500 bodies back there. I mean, this was the final official explanation, but these people were being killed. Yes, smaller in this room.
Old junkie from Detroit who was a survivor of Jonestown. The guy said he hid under the
Odell Rhodes.
Maybe his name. What happened to him? Where is he now?
I don't know where all the survivors are. Many of them survived because they cooperated with the plan and were meant to survive. That's the case with the basketball team and other people.
They were off somewhere.
Well, they eventually got to Georgetown and eventually came back to the United States. Some of them were out on a ship. The ones that were on the boat with Blakey went to Trinidad. Then they went to Panama and emptied a $5 million bank account in Credit Suisse. And then they went to Grenada. They set up shop in Grenada, I believe, in the mental hospital there, with Dr. Bourne and his father, who worked in primate research with MKUltra. And Bourne set up all the methadone programs in the United States for the Rockefellers. And I think they were experimenting on the mental patients because that's the only building bombed in the invasion of Grenada. And there's 180 people in the inmates in the psychiatric institution murdered, dumped into a mass grave, and then the U.S. was going to send $400 million to rebuild the hospital. I mean, they were going to make it a better unit to experiment on people after they got the right government in.
Early on, a cocaine smuggling operation, because I believe
there were drugs and guns being smuggled in and out, and there were relations of mercenaries. Some of these killers that were taken in and out of Angola. The CIA-backed UNITA forces by Blakey, Iran mercenaries, and they did run guns and drugs, but the operation was primarily an extension of MKUltra. People were taken off the streets here in San Francisco, out of the welfare rolls, from the elderly homes, from the psychiatric institutions, from the prisons. Children were given as wards of the court and turned over into their control. They put them in buses. They took them to Miami, and I talked to an air traffic controller when they landed in Guyana. All of the blacks were bound and gagged coming off of the plane. People 5 miles away didn't even know there were blacks at Jonestown. All they had ever seen of People's Temple were the white crew that was running it, going in and out of the cities. They were buying Guyanese babies from women wherever they could give a blanket or something for a baby and taking them back in there, and there was massive experimentation. There were enough drugs on site to drug the population of Georgetown, Guyana, over 120,000 for more than a year for a population of 1,200 people in this camp. And Dr. Schacht, who I believe survived, he's not in the first death list. He's added to the second. I think he's related to Hjalmar Schacht, the Mike Reich's Minister of Finance, who developed the phrase "Arbeit macht frei," work makes you free, at the Auschwitz camp. And they came to Houston. That's where the Schacht family ended up. They were the big bankers for Hitler. And this guy is from Houston, and he was not a doctor. He was described as doing, suturing on wounds without anesthesia and all kind of sadistic things. And they had medical tags. You can see even in Time magazine medical tags on the people. But an order came down from Zbigniew Brzezinski through Haig to Robert Pastor on site to strip bodies of all identification and tags. Then the bodies are left in the sun to rot so that no fingerprints, no identification can be done from the tags, and no autopsy can be done, fluid or otherwise, by the time they get back to the United States. So you can never find out what killed them or how many drugs they had in the body. They had one footlocker there with 11,000 doses of Thorazine. And the drugs that are described are the exact drugs that were used for 30 years in MKUltra in the different control scenarios.
With a past that's littered with so many shattered lives and a trail of mental torture, the challenge of the new millennium will be learning how to best protect ourselves from mind control.
Somehow, the average citizen thinks that his or her mind could never be manipulated. And yet every day we're manipulated by each other, we're manipulated by advertising. 1,000 things impact and manipulate us in different ways.
We're bombarded with messages from the media, the radio, the television, and from newspapers that shape our perceptions of the world.
This relentless yet subtle conditioning can develop without you even knowing it.
Watching television is a trance-like experience. You forget about the carpet, the curtains, and that you're sitting in a room, and you engage your experience directly into the television screen, so that whatever happens on the screen seems really real. You suspend belief in reality. If you don't take responsibility for what goes into your mind, somebody else will. Cult leaders, politicians, advertisers will all seek to implant their message in your mind, whether it's for your good or not.
The greatest battle of the 21st century will be a battle of the mind. And there are people who have power, who want more power, and they do not want the public to know about mind control, its existence, or how it's implemented.
There is a body of information being used by government to control the way people think and act, and experiments are systematically designed to increase government's knowledge about that. This is the most threatening part of being a citizen in a democracy. When your government can manipulate how you vote and how you think, you no longer live in a democracy.
Well, you know that it's going to be alright. I think it's gonna be alright. Everything will always be alright when we go shopping.
What advertising has always wanted to do is not simply to suffuse the atmosphere, but to become the atmosphere. It wants us not to be able to find a way outside of the world that it creates for us.
It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
But, you know, that goes straight back in American history. You read the working class press in the mid-19th century, you know, press published by artisans and what were called factory girls, young women from the farms working in the textile mills in eastern Massachusetts, which was the center of beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Their press was calling for, they said their theme was that those who work in the mills ought to own them. Wage labor, which was called wage slavery, was regarded by most Americans as not very different from slavery. Even the Republican Party regarded wage labor as just at best a preliminary to free labor, but intolerable because it's a kind of servitude. A large part of the northern population fighting the Civil War was fighting under that banner.
Last fall, while some people went shopping for new sweaters, the people of Peterborough went shopping for a new energy company.
Deregulation is giving the people the ability to choose.
I think that the town made a really good choice.
With Enron, we've seen energy rates cut between 15 and 18%.
You don't even know that there's a difference until you get your bill.
Nobody likes a monopoly, particularly in a place where the state motto is live free or die.
You can choose your neighbors, and soon you may choose your energy company. Enron.
I know I need to listen.
No one has imported the techniques and philosophy of market research into politics more successfully than Frank Luntz. His clients have been some of the most prominent Republican politicians of the last decade. There was the mayoral campaign for Rudolph Giuliani in 1993, his work for Silvio Berlusconi in Italy, and especially his collaboration with Newt Gingrich on the famous Contract with America, the document that ushered in the Republican Revolution in Congress.
If an electricity company stood up and said, we want to do it for your benefit, we want to do it for our benefit, we want to do it for everyone's benefit, and so we have a better approach.
Tonight, Luntz's client is not a candidate, but a Florida utility wanting to build public support for a change in how it's regulated on the environment.
I know that the public is very down on corporate America in general, and they're down on power companies. So what is the language? What is the information? What are the facts? What are the figures that would get Americans to say, you know what, my electricity company, it's okay?
On one hand, you have wind, which has no fossil fuels associated with it.
To get at his subjects' gut feelings, Luntz has them register their moment-by-moment responses to a speech by a power company executive.
Climbing, changing fuels.
But watching Luntz work, I couldn't help wondering, do the words he's found help the public see the issue more clearly, or do they disguise it? Is Luntz listening to us so his clients can give us what we want, or so we can figure out how to make us want what they have to sell?
The words work. The words apply to the policy. This is how we're going to sell it. And I'll be able to walk to this electricity company on Monday and be able to say to them, your policy makes sense, and here's the language to explain it. That was the eureka moment. When I watched people nod their heads, I watched them look to each other, and they were willing at this point to fight for this position. You're replacing the bad with the good. It's almost like in with
This is a guy who is merchandising ideas and merchandising a movement and merchandising a political party. And in many instances, the words that he says are the ones that resonate, are ones that obscure to some extent the issue.
Take the so-called death tax. When it was called the estate tax, most people supported it. But Luntz managed to turn public opinion against it simply by giving it an emotionally loaded new name.
For years, political people and lawyers, who, by the way, are the worst communicators, used the phrase estate tax. And for years, they couldn't eliminate it, but the public wouldn't support it because the word estate sounds wealthy. Someone like me comes around and realizes that it's not an estate tax, it's a death tax, because you're taxed at death. And suddenly something that isn't viable achieves the support of 75% of the American people. It's the same tax, but nobody really knows what an estate is. But they certainly know what it means to be taxed when you die. I'd argue that is a clarification. That's not an obfuscation.
Luntz has admonished Republican politicians to talk about tax relief instead of tax cuts, and to replace the war in Iraq with the war on terror. He once told his party to speak of climate change, not global warming.
What is the difference? It is climate change. Some people call it global warming, some people call it climate change. What is the difference?
It apparently made enough difference to Republicans that they began to use climate change almost exclusively.
It caused climate change.
The President's Global Climate Change Initiative.
Climate change research.
And we must address the issue of global climate change.
You should look at public opinion polls for the same reason that they are taken. Well, why do we have so many public opinion polls in the United States? They're mostly business or initiated. The propaganda institutions, like the PR industry, they want to keep their finger on the public pulse. They got to know how to design the propaganda. So they want to know what people are thinking. So, in fact, if you want to find out, you can find out too. And you can find out how these opinions are changed.
The most effective kind of propaganda was defined as the kind where the subject moves in the direction you desire for reasons which he believes to be his own.
What really matters is the fact that the major institutions in the society are under totalitarian control. After all, what's a corporation? You know, a corporation is just a tyrannical system, one of the most tyrannical systems that humans have ever devised. They've been given extraordinary rights by the courts, not by legislation, early in this century. They're, like the multilateral agreement would give them actually the rights of states. They're basically unaccountable to the public. When they've been given the rights of persons, that means, for example, they have the right to propagandize. So, like, they've been given the rights of free speech, which is insane. You know, these are collectivist institutions. they've been given the right to advertise, in fact, at your expense. So you get the tax-free, so you pay for the privilege of having your minds destroyed, they own the information system. I mean, they control the information system. What are the media? Huge corporations, parts of bigger corporations. That sets the framework of discussion. The major decisions that affect what happens in the economy and social life are made behind closed doors. Very little public accountability. They have the right of freedom from search and seizure. Fourth Amendment rights means you can't know anything about what they're doing. And they have enormous power. Furthermore, it's described as free trade. It's ridiculous. I mean, these are secret institutions, so all figures have to be taken with a big grain of salt because nobody really knows. But the guesses are that by international economists that maybe 40% or so of U.S. trade is actually internal to corporations, meaning it's not trade at all. It's just moving something across a border. It's no more trade than moving from Indiana to Illinois or something like that. Happens across a border, to get cheaper labor, to avoid environmental restrictions and so on. Well, 40% is not a small number. And that's a vast underestimate because there are also complicated strategic alliances among alleged competitors. So IBM and Toshiba and Siemens and so on are working together. They're working together on design, on marketing, and so on. And in fact, it's gotten to the point where some international economists call it a new system of what they call alliance capitalism. Big networks of tyrannical institutions basically running the world. I mean, in comparison with this, the difference between, everybody voting and everybody not voting is pretty trivial.
In the Reagan administration, you really had a massive enterprise to control the public mind. In fact, when this was exposed during the Iran-Contra hearings, partially exposed, one high administration official described it as the most successful operation they carried out. He said it's the kind of operation that you carry out in enemy territory. And that expresses the attitude toward the population completely. The population is the enemy, and you've got to control enemy territory, and the way you do it is by very extensive public diplomacy, meaning propaganda.
Intelligent propaganda is not a propaganda that tells blatant lies. It's something where you try to show the good side of what you're supporting, and you don't tell about the negatives. You only tell about the positives, which is true, but it's only a half-truth. And then it makes it a half-lie, if you will.
It is told in the words and from the perspective of the power wielders, and with no view from outside the walls. And that's really, I think, in a nutshell, the problem with so much of the coverage in Washington, is that the habits of mind that inform it, the sympathies that inform it, are all with the people at the top, and not with the people outside the palace.
The biggest joke, I think, in Washington is the idea that the press has an adversarial relationship to the city it covers and to the class of politicians and bureaucrats that it covers, when in fact it is so far from their adversary. It's a component of their life. It's a vicarious member of the same club. The adversarial definition is part of the self-flattery, the self-adoration with which the press conceives of its role and justifies its role to the public, who, of course, would like to think that there was a watchdog instead of a lapdog in Washington. They aren't so lucky.
Inside the club, it's getting hard to tell anymore who's the reporter and who's the politician. These days, they sometimes just spin together in Washington's revolving door.
I used to worry about blurred lines. Now the lines, they're not even blurred. They're gone. The lines are gone. I mean, people pop in and out of administrations all the time. Jim Fallow, speechwriter for Jimmy Carter, then national correspondent for The Atlantic. I mean, I didn't like it at first, but it's a phenomenon of our time, of the 80s and 90s, that people are going to work in politics and go into journalism, and they're going to pop back and forth.
No, I don't think Bob Dole's a mean person. I think he's an undisciplined person. And
the most notorious case of media cross-dressing involved ABC commentator George Will.
George Will helped to prep Ronald Reagan for presidential debate with papers that had been stolen in a black propaganda operation from Jimmy Carter's campaign. Having helped in that obscene prep, he then went on the air as an objective commentator later that night to say that he thought Reagan, viewing it objectively, dispassionately, fair-mindedly, even-handedly, and so on, had done best in the debate, rating the horse that he'd been secretly training. Paid no price for it.
More than anyone, political analyst David Gergen seems stuck in the revolving door.
Bob, you decided to call this book The Choice that voters must make this November.
After working for Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, Gergen began writing for U.S. News and World Report and appearing on McNeil Lehrer. Then he returned to politics as a Clinton advisor, and now he's back in the media.
When you click on that set, you sort of have to say, what to yourself? Am I seeing David Gergen, the thoughtful journalist, as he sometimes is, or am I seeing a guy who fairly recently was in the employ of Bill Clinton as a paid propagandist? Sometimes even I find the lines too blurry to follow the action.
Through propaganda, we can derogate our opponents and dehumanize them. You know, we didn't refer to Germans, we referred to Huns. We didn't refer to Italians, we referred to, as you know, we didn't refer to Vietnamese, we referred to Gooks. So Huns and Wops and Gooks and Japs were the short circuit that we would take to dehumanize our adversaries and to reduce them to a sub level.
The time, the middle of the 19th century. The place, the American West. The Armed Forces Screen Magazine presents The Covered Wagon, backbone of the Western Trek, didn't stand a chance when it was traveling alone through hostile country. When attack came, the covered wagon could protect itself only if it banded together with other wagons. This was mutual defense. This was mutual security. We as a nation are able to live a peaceful life, but hanging over us all is the specter of a haunting and horrible fear.
The medium weight force is clearly the force of the future. It's a cavalry type force, and clearly the Indians are out there. That's politically incorrect, but we're dealing with cavalry and Indians again, and the cavalry is what we need.
In order to stop saboteurs armed with atomic explosives, we could search all planes and trains and boats and automobiles crossing our borders from now on. We could open every single package. We could remain on a constant 24-hour, day in, day out alert.
Man muss nämlich gut regieren und für eine gute Regierung auch eine gute Propaganda betreiben. Das eine gehört zum anderen. Eine gute Regierung ohne Propaganda kann ebenso wenig bestehen wie eine gute Propaganda ohne eine gute Regierung.
I was raised in a milieu where I was taught that communism leads to dictatorship and that capitalism leads to democracy. But it's not that simple.
The essence of a politician, of the political animal, is the pursuit of power.
You can say what you want about this country, and I love this place. I love the freedoms we used to have. I love it. I love that.
So what do they get when they are elected to office? They get power, not money, power.
Free market capitalism definitely democratizes a country and a culture. But corporate crony capitalism, of the kind we're seeing with this White House, is as antithetical to democracy in America as it is in
Power of concentrated wealth shall not be abused.
Americans have to understand the difference between free market capitalism, which benefits our country, and this kind of corporate crony capitalism where we have large corporations running our government, and there's a name for that, and the name is fascism.
And we know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob.
A need to dominate, a need to control,
And again, above all, a need to dominate.
The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything.
Big Brother is watching you. And the little people.
Obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money.
It's not a conspiracy.
And what he found was no criminal conspiracy.
It can't really be a conspiracy.
There's no conspiracy?
No conspiracy.
Everyone is saying the exact same thing on the exact same day. It's almost as if there was some kind of, I don't know. What's the word I'm looking for? Some sort of larger plan.
A need to control, a need to dominate, which is what leads people into politics.
The temptation to use public power and play God is almost irresistible.
I am ours, the great and powerful.
As of now, I am in control here.
To the corrupt, thieving politicians of America.
We're not going to transform our fine FBI into a Gestapo secret.
And Franklin Roosevelt said that. He said fascism is the control of government by large corporations for their own benefit. And I actually, and I'll close with this, I have an American Heritage Dictionary, the last edition, which I keep at home, which says that defines fascism as the control of government by large corporations with right-wing ideology driven by bellicose nationalism. If that sounds familiar to a lot of you.
Decisions are made on bases other than what is best for the country and what is best for the ordinary people in this country. They have other motives, other drives, other wants, other needs, and they exercise them.
I'm reminded of Tocqueville's remark that when tyranny comes to the United States, he said it would be very, very quiet, and it would be the sleep that comes over the somnolence that comes over quiet and pacific industrial animals, comparing us to sheep out in the meadow.
We were sure that ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet, until the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, Jr. I was taught that our armies were always invincible and our causes were always just.
Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon, they all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam!
While survival of the fittest may be a good working description of the process of evolution, a government of humans should elevate itself to a higher order.
We apply social values, more noble than mere monetary profit.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care.
The no is that we have dumbed the public down to the point where I think most people don't realize what they're missing. They don't know what's out there.
The great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning.